It's time to be woke. Take off your shades. It helps see through the smoke. Cause the wicked hide behind the cloak. And if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog. What's real, what ain't? Is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the song, we out here, yeah. Speeding the facts.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hair of the Dog. I'm Andy Kennedy. It is Wednesday morning. Thank you so much for tuning in to see us this morning. We're happy that you decided to. We have a rather robust discussion planned for you this morning about two items that are going to be intermingled and shown why they are together very problematic for the future of Americans. And those two different topics are homelessness and the prison industrial complex in the US. But that doesn't start until I introduce my lovely and talented co-host, Ms. Gary Barber. Good morning, Gary.
Hi, Andy. Good morning. Welcome to Wednesday. Welcome everybody who's joining us today from House of Public Discourse, also Fred Hampton Leftist, and all of our syndication stations. We really appreciate you being here, and I really want you to weigh in on this conversation. And I got to admit, this morning I'm still apprehensive about bringing this story forward, and let me tell you why. As a journalist, it is my job to bring things to light and present them to you in a way that's knowable and understandable and also credible, and hope that you care. And I have very little faith that is going to happen this morning, not because of you as an individual, but because behind all of this, I'm watching us as Americans really not give a shit about the people standing next to us and whether they live or die. So why should anybody care about somebody who's in prison? And this is why I want to go through who actually is in prison. What does it look like? Who are we in our prison population and in the for-profit prison model? And is it really what we think it is? So and I would invite you, I had the same kind of reaction when I approached this story and some folks handed me some articles. I had that same knee-jerk reaction that we all have after being inundated with propaganda for our entire lives, that thugs were in prison, right? Because that's what we've been told. That's what Hillary talked about. That's what Biden talked about. That's what Reagan talked about. All of these powerful individuals talked about. It's just thugs, waves of thugs and gangs that are in prison. And that's not true. That's absolutely not true. So I want to talk about exactly the facts, the data, the statistics about who's in prison, what happens when they get out of prison, how we treat these people once they've paid their debt to society, and what is actually going on right now today in our prison system, particularly when it comes to the dire effects of climate change. So I hope that you will stick with me, and please keep an open mind. Also, kind of check your own reaction to what's going on and decide, well, am I reacting based on the propaganda, or is this legitimate criticism? And this, I think, is going to be an exploration of your own personal bias as well as presenting the facts. So I hope you'll stick with us through the entire program, weigh in and share your thoughts. Also, if you have resources or stories that you want to share, please share them with the chat. This is, of course, a family conversation, so we'll explore all of this together. So thank you for that. before we get to that, Andy, is there anything you want to touch on this morning or highlight for the audience?
No, I'm going to defer to you to start this conversation, and I'll add my commentary when I think it's needed. I think we should get right into it because I think there's a lot to unpack here. So I'm not going to waste any time with any other subjects. So I say, what do you say we just get right into it?
Okay, sounds good, because there's really a lot to cover. So just real quick, good morning, Stephanie. Stephanie's listening to us from her mail truck. So thank you, Stephanie. And thank you for your extraordinary service. Really appreciate that. Let's see. Don't tell the house slaves. Good morning. Optimism of the will. And everyone else who's joining us, again, if you have an opportunity to jump in on the chat, we encourage you to do so. So just be polite, be civil. Remember, we're all family here. So we're going to do that. And optimism, thank you. Yeah, Chris Hedges has a great series and investigation on this. We don't have any of his links today, but feel free to post and share those if you have one in particular that you think everyone should be familiar with. So I appreciate it. And Deborah, thank you, Deborah. You were with us on Monday, so thanks for coming back today. Appreciate it. So, okay, let's start with our prison population. Here was an interesting statistic. And one of the groups that I have newly discovered that you may already be familiar with is a organization called Prison Policy. So it's prisonpolicy.org. So I took some of the statistics and their fact sheets. So that's the reference and backdrop that I'm using for some of the stats today. And one that was most surprising to me is over the course of a year, 1 year, we have up to 10 million people engaged in either local jails or state prisons at some point. But if you look at the statistics about who is day after day, year after year in prison, that number is about 2 million. So we have a whole lot of people going through the system in a single year. That's staggering. But then we got to remember, we lead the world. We're American exceptionalism with prison population. Why? Why is that? There's an economic component to that, right? You can't, slavery is not legal, but prisons sure are.
Yeah,
So,
and I would say that that's probably the number one consideration.
Yeah. Well, yeah. How else do you get 50 cents an hour firefighters, right? You mentioned that before we got started this morning.
Yeah. Yeah, it's if you think back in your history of the United States, right? And when slavery was abolished, right? Why was slavery so prevalent in the United States? Right? It wasn't about, the value of Black people versus white people. It was about the ability of landowners and the elitist of the society having a slave labor camp, right? That people that they could have do their work for them. They didn't have to pay them anything, and they got to keep all the profits, right? Oh, capitalism. Oh my goodness. Woo-hoo. And so when slavery was abolished, the capitalist society that we've lived in, they don't want to give up what they lost, right? They were trying to minimize the amount of money they had to pay their workers back then. So what do? Well, we vilify an entire portion of society, namely people of color, and we throw them in prisons for bullshit reasons like marijuana possession. Then we have something that indicates that they're not necessarily dangerous offenders. They just like to smoke weed. So now we have this huge population that we can draw from, and we could still just exploit them like we did when they were slaves. And what we can do as well is the likes of neoliberal politicians like Joe Biden, who was responsible for the crime bill, and vilifying Black people and telling white people they're coming for you, they're dangerous, you've got to protect yourself. And then that just perpetuates this thought of, well, Black people are just bad and they need to go to prison. And that just perpetuates the labor pool that rich oligarchs can pull from, right? So it's basically legalized slavery in another way.
Oh, absolutely. And we did have a push for ending cash bail, and that died a horrible death. Nobody cared. And so Stephanie said she did a birthday fundraiser for the Bail Project, which is a fantastic organization. Again, that's the Bail Project. And she said she got a lot of pushback from friends and family. And so, Stephanie, that is exactly that knee-jerk reaction I was talking about. Even I went through it, and I had to check myself about, wait, it's not all thugs. And Andy, you brought up a good point about who is actually in prison. And in Chicago being one major city of those across the nation, you have people sitting in jail waiting trial for like parking tickets 6 months or more because they couldn't afford bail. So these are the people that we're talking about. So yeah, and Don't Tell the House Slave says new Jim Crow is a must in every home library. Yeah, I totally agree. Absolutely agree. Good reading assignment for everybody. But one of the statistics that I wanted to go through, again, this is going from prisonpolicy.org. They did this really nice chart and a breakdown. I put a link in the chat so that you can follow along if you're not driving like Stephanie. Who actually is in prison. So they break it down between local jails, federal prisons, and state prisons. And I thought that this was a fascinating look at who these people really are. So when we're talking about, like you mentioned, Andy, drugs, and they don't really give a breakdown on what kind of drugs or whatever, but all drug convictions in state prisons, that's about 200,000 people sitting in prisons. In local jails, those people who haven't even been convicted yet, they haven't had their due process, they are awaiting trial, that's almost 500,000 people. So when I talked about those people who were awaiting parking tickets, drug offenses, petty theft, those types of things, or public disorder, this is when we saw in LA County, they were arresting homeless people because they have a license to do so. So that number of the public disorder is 82,000 people. Property where they're just not even convicted is 117,000. Drug offenses, 120,000. And then you have the violent criminals, and they don't really break down what violent is, but it's at 149,000. So this is a whole lot of folks sitting in prison who may or may not be. So when we talk about the total population and just break it down between violent and non-violent, the violent cases, and this is assault, robbery, rape, manslaughter, and outright murder, that's 700,000. So of the millions that go through the system every year, 700,000 is the violent criminals. Those are the ones who have been convicted. Now we can go into an entire series about whether it's justified or not, but everyone else is a non-violent drug, petty theft, public disorder, being arrested for being homeless, or in LA County, if you live in a tent during business hours, you can be arrested and put in jail. So that's kind of a breakdown. The other one I think is pretty telling is immigration detention. They cannot leave. That is a prison. 42,000 people. We still have kids in cages. 42,000 is the number, and this number came out months ago, so it may actually be higher. Children, people under the age of 18, sitting in youth detention centers, some of them in prison. That number is 44,000. And then those people who have been involuntarily committed is 22,000. So this gives you a breakdown of who we're actually talking about: local jails, state prisons, federal prisons, and jails. Okay, so that kind of sets it up for you. The majority of people are not violent thugs. They're not murderers and rapists, but yet that's always the group that we get forwarded in the narrative. And honestly, that's the group that strikes your mind first when we talk about prisons. Because yeah, it's a great way to keep us in line. At the same time, we're making profit off of these people. So yeah. And Nadia, we're going to talk about the homelessness of ex-felons, because when we talk about a disenfranchised population, you can't get to anything better as an example of our failure as a society than ex-felons, because the whole thought process, remember when we were kids, you've got to go pay your debt to society, restitution, all of that sort of thing. And then when you get out of prison, you're supposed to rejoin society, but that's not how it happens. So number one, there are, I believe it's 25 states that take away your right to vote forever. How is that even possible? You have paid your debt to society. Why shouldn't you be a full member of society again with all the rights? But in 25 states, they say, no, we're going to take that away from you. And what was really interesting to me is, maybe it's coincidence, but maybe it's not. The majority of those states who do not allow you to vote as an ex-felon happen to be strategic swing states. So 2 states in particular that prison policy looked at was Virginia and Florida. So in those 2 states, as of today, there are 2 million people who have lost the right to vote forever in those states. Coincidence? Maybe. But I thought it was pretty telling.
Well, sure.
So,
If you're a victim of the political system that sends people to prison for bullshit reasons, right? When you've done your time and you come out, the last thing that the establishment wants you to be able to do is vote to maintain or to make change because you might be angry, right? And by the way, Nadia, we're going to send you a hair of the dog alarm clock, because I'm starting to get disappointed because you always seem to be late and having to catch up. So there's something wrong with your alarm clock. So we're going to send you a new one.
we don't have alarm clocks.
Well, but we will. If we do, if we make them, then we'll send you one.
Okay, very good. Good morning, Nadia. So, yeah, and you brought up a good point, right? So if you're in the system and you want to make change, voting direct action is the way to go. Well, how can you, right? So here's a stark example. We have Guantanamo Bay is still open. It has been open for decades. This private prison in Cuba at one of our military bases that has been hit completely year over year with human rights violations, serious human rights violations, and oh, by the way, war crimes. Oh, but we weren't at war. Ironically, one of the gentlemen that we had held and tortured at Guantanamo is now a leading commander of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Chickens came home to roost there, right? So if you were tortured by a country for over a decade, would you forgive that country? I mean, let's just keep it real. This guy has a legitimate gripe against the United States, and he's justified in that because of what we did to him. And if you recall all the horrors that were going on in Guantanamo, among them a 16-year-old child who tried to commit suicide because the torture was so bad, right? So it's not just Guantanamo. One of the other statistics I thought was very telling is there's a timeline when you enter the US prison system. And one of the statistics that I thought was horrific was within the first week of being incarcerated, that's where over 40% of attempted and suicides occur. So within that first week of being in prison, most prisoners attempt suicide. And this is all across the board, whether it's a violent crime or not. That's very telling. Our prison systems are not rehabilitation zones. They're not humanitarian efforts. This is a big deal. So I thought that particular statistic speaks to who we are as a society, not necessarily the prison population. So
right.
yeah. So optimism is saying the 5% of the population and 25% of prisoners is it just the tip of the carceral iceberg. Right, absolutely. And I don't want to give anyone the impression that we're doing a comprehensive look at this. We're not. We're just pulling out a couple aspects of this to bring it to your attention in hopes that you will do more research on your own, maybe read through these stories. And I know that there are a lot of Facebook groups of family members who are trying to get aid to their members, their family members who are in prison, because little things like visitation out the window, things like getting paper and things to write with, to write letters. And I have some other examples of where we have so gone off the rails in how we treat our prison population. But all of those Facebook groups and organizations are out there. So please take a few minutes and see if you can find and talk to people who are going through it or have gone through it. And one of them, I am so privileged to work on a synopsis for a gentleman that we had interviewed who wrote his own memoir about what it was to go through the prison experience, what effect it had on him, some of the things he dealt with. And I think it really puts a human face on it. And likewise, when you develop that kind of empathy, it makes you more human too. So please don't think that this is just comprehensive. So yeah.
Carrie,
Right, so
I just wanted to make a quick point that Derek had commented that the swing state is a silly idea that pretends that the Dems and Republicans are different teams, right? And generally, as a Canadian, when Carrie and I first started this project, she actually had to explain to me what the difference, what a purple state was or a swing state, because I didn't understand the concept. And she said that, well, a purple state or a swing state can go either way in an election. And I'm like, isn't that how elections are supposed to work? The whole rest of the world is a swing state, right? You don't know who people are going to vote for. They vote for politicians based more on policy or whatever, right? Instead of it being predetermined in most states in the US, what the turnout's going to be like, right? Like that's most of the world is like that. Right? Not like the US where you've got just a handful of states that's going to determine the election because they could vote either way. Just found that kind of funny.
Yeah, we do. We are so undemocratic. It's not even funny. So yeah, it's a numbers game. Absolutely. So yeah, good point. So let's talk about for just a moment, when we're talking about, we've done a lot of subjects here on homelessness, the housing crisis, and other aspects of it. But this was one part of who are the homeless or housing insecure people that I hadn't really understood before. So I want to share this with you as I have explored it a little bit and get your take on it. So Andy, this is the first graphic. Homelessness is part of the larger problem of housing insecurity. And once again, this is coming from Prison Policy Initiative. The reason why I like this particular organization is they put their source data in all of this. So not only do they have really nice, clean looking graphics, but their source data is available. So I could go through it and, data itself doesn't lie, but you can cherry pick some data. And I am confident that what I'm looking at is an accurate representation of the source data. So this is why I'm forwarding this for your consideration. But here's what I thought was interesting when we're talking about homeless populations, and this subject came up in the chat. If you go into prison, you make a mistake, something happens, petty theft, whatever it is. If you come out, now what do you do, right? Because in many states, they still hand you a check for $200 and a bus ticket. That's the equivalent of what you get. So what do you do? If you don't have friends or family willing to support you, even over the short term or longer, you're going to be in some serious trouble, right? Because try to apply for a job. And what happens? A number of people will reject you outright. You're going to have a serious problem. If you can't find work, or you're being taken advantage of, or all of these sorts of things, you are going to end up homeless. So this is exactly what they are talking about here. So between homeless, marginal housing, and total housing insecure. So marginal housing would be something that is less than ideal, maybe not necessarily sanitary or temporary, those types of things. So in this particular chart, I think it's pretty telling when it's talking about former incarcerated people per 10,000. So when you look at the number of total housing insecurities at 570, that's per 10,000 over the entire population. It's a really big number. So homeless, as they define it, is in a shelter or a halfway house. Homeless or no fixed residence. Marginal is in a rooming house, hotel, or motel. It's pretty expensive. And oh, by the way, if you were in prison for drugs or other things, and you're at a shady motel, guess what's going to be in your face all the time, right? That's a no-brainer. It would be so easy for somebody to slip and fall back into the system. And then housing insecure is in a shelter, homeless or no fixed residence, couch surfing, rooming house, hotel, or motel. So this is you. Maybe you've got a friend or family who's willing to put you up for just a little bit of time. Yeah, that's you, right? So it's not just the rest of the population where we're having trouble making rents, we're having trouble paying mortgages. We have all of these pressures plus a global pandemic. Our wages have been suppressed. Now imagine that you don't even have that kind of privilege to be under that kind of oppression. You're going to end up homeless. And we already know, we've explored some of the challenges that we have dealing with our homeless population. What do? We put spikes on benches and spikes on windowsills. That's our answer to homelessness. Or, LA County decides to spend $130,000 on, what did you call them, Andy? Ice fishing houses, metal houses in California.
What did I'm sorry, what
we were talking about when we were talking about the homeless shelters being put up in LA, and they were the little tin and aluminum and metal structures. You called them, I think, ice fishing houses. They were really, really small.
Yes, fishing huts, ice fishing huts.
Yeah.
They're basically glorified porta potties.
That's exactly right. Slightly larger, but still you don't have enough room to turn around and change your mind. So, okay. So Derek, good morning, Derek. Thank you for coming back. Derek, my favorite person, says homeless is a gross term that's a static noun. Many people experience homelessness for times in their lives, but it's not entirety of them. We leave people unhoused. The onus is on society. Okay, fair point. Be unhoused. I am using the term homeless and homelessness because it's on the charts, and in your head, go ahead and call it unhoused. So I appreciate that correction there. And then Gary, good morning, Gary. Gary says a policeman can arrest you for self-medicating, but can't find you any healthcare services. Well, and isn't that part of the whole defund the police thing, right? So rather than having a police officer go to that call, we want to have a social service worker, and it's already being used in other parts of the country, particularly in a city in Colorado, to great effect, great positive effect. So, and then optimism, blocking ex-felons from public housing, great solution. Yeah, that's exactly right, right? So we've got, in that series that we did on the housing crisis and climate change, we talked about the numbers of public housing spaces have been reduced, although the money that we spend, public money, has gone up. And part of that is because it's become a for-profit system. So imagine that. We have fewer housing units available, but it's costing us more. Yeah, so that's part of that. And if you missed that series that we did with Veterans Off Grid and everything else, please go take a look at it. It's on our website. It's on our Facebook page, and Fred Hampton Leftist has it in their playlist for Hair of the Dog. So we did an entire week on that particular topic. So
right, and I just wanted to comment on Gary's post that the same people that murdered Fred Hampton are still in charge, and that's true. I don't necessarily use the word murdered. I use the word executed, because he was basically executed by the FBI and the Chicago Police Department.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, they're still around, still doing their thing. Okay, and then Derek, thank you, Derek. Derek says, speaking to the medical professional instead of police, the programs I can think of are DASH, or DASHR in Denver, and Cahoots in Oregon. I know a city council person trying to do that here in Boulder, Colorado too. And that's exactly the way to go. So thank you, Derek, for that particular information. It's,
this is a good time to recall the time in New York City. And forgive me, because I'm not 100% sure of the time frame of what year it was. But at the time, there was a problem with the police union in New York City, and they were going to be forced to do something, and the police union didn't agree. So they started to do job action, and they started to cut back on the number of police that were out patrolling the streets in New York City to show America, and crime went down.
Isn't that funny how that happened? Yeah, that was what, a year and a half ago. Yeah, and that was over response to defund the police. Here's the funny thing, right? So in Albuquerque, so for those of you who still don't know, New Mexico has ended qualified immunity. I want to say that again. The state of New Mexico has ended qualified immunity for every elected official, every judge, every city council person, and every police officer. How did we do it? I personally get frustrated because I have shown other podcasters and offered to show podcasters and other leaders how we did it, how to do this in your state, your local municipality, and I've gotten zero response. Zero. We like to complain, but we don't like to do it. So in New Mexico, where we ended qualified immunity, we have an entirely different relationship with our police officers, particularly here in Albuquerque. And one of the police officers came out, it was about a month and a half ago, as a whistleblower, talking about he had quotas on parking tickets and driving infractions. And everybody was outraged. What do you mean you still have quotas? And he was able to show that he had been disciplined for not writing enough tickets, for traffic violations and everything else. People were outraged and sided with the whistleblower and went after his police chief, and they got that situation shut down. So isn't it so when you bring up New York and what happened there, And then I look at Albuquerque, I'm like, yeah, this is night and day. And what's the difference? We ended qualified immunity. We have an entirely different relationship with our police force here in this city than they do in New York. And don't tell me we don't have the same kind of violent crimes and drug offenses and all of it. We do. We absolutely do. But what's different? What's different? We hold them accountable. So once again, with snark and frustration, I'm going to offer anybody who wants to know how to end qualified immunity in your state, in your local municipal area, at your county level, send me an email. I will show you how to do it. Or if you just want to bitch about it, hey, go for it. It's hairofthedogshow@gmail.com, hairofthedogshow@gmail.com. This is not hard. So anyway, just want to put that out there. But moving on. Andy, you want to put up the next graphic?
I would be absolutely thrilled to. Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you. Thank you. So I alluded to this early on when we talked about disenfranchised voters, right? So we had all of these voter suppression bills going out from Republicans. Shocker. And then you had Democrats going, no, we're going to push back. But it was kind of a flaccid response. Except in Texas, I want to give a shout out to the state representatives in Texas who actually left their capital and were trying to stall all of that effort. But let's take it another step further here. And I talked to a gentleman in Chicago. So Illinois, if you're incarcerated and you come out, you regain your voting rights. But this gentleman was part of a prison ministry in other states. And he agreed, yeah, these other states, and I think we arrived at the number of 25 officially in these states, do not reinstate your voting rights. First off, I don't know that that's constitutionally correct, because there's nothing in the Constitution that says you no longer become a citizen after incarceration. But once again, unless you're going to challenge it and go to the Supreme Court with it, what do you do, right? So for those of you who are checked out of electoral politics, this is absolutely something that you can change at your local state level. If you're in one of those states that does not allow it, then you have several different options to make that change. Either you can find a state representative to submit a bill and garner support for that bill to make sure it passes, or you can do what's called a binding resolution, and that requires no support from any elected official. That's you and your fellow neighbors getting together to sign the petition, get it on the next ballot, and have everybody vote on it. So there are options available to you to make these changes in your state if you choose to take this on. And there are already some groups who are working very hard to do that. So find them, join them, start that action. If you believe that you are a U.S. citizen and have voting rights when you have paid your debt to society. So yeah, I think this graphic is pretty telling. And again, it goes back to swing states or however you want to tell it. But even if you're not in a swing state, do we not want people back into the fold? Is that the goal? Once they get out of prison, we're supposed to reinstate them and help them acclimate and get back into society? Or are we really saying as a society that these are cast off individuals, they're not even human, and we can just discard them? So it's one thing to push back on the police system, the for-profit system, but what are our actions in practice that help propagate this, right? So I can sit here and talk about being against the for-profit prison system, being against all of these egregious things, but if I am sitting here not doing anything to reinstate these people, then my actions speak louder than my objections. Am I wrong in that? Or are we not all culpable for some of this too? What direct action are you taking? What have you done? Have you forwarded some of this? So like Stephanie's example where she was trying to do a birthday fundraiser and got pushback. At least Stephanie tried. She did something. What are we doing besides complaining?
Well, and
Okay,
I
so
think that
all of this,
a lot of what you're talking about, Carrie, is a logical process of steps that people just aren't making, right? They don't understand that people make mistakes. And even if you look at the prison system on its face and think that, okay, it serves a purpose, right? The whole concept of the prison system is rehabilitation, right? That you're going to go into the prison system, you're going to do your time for the heinous crime, whatever you committed, right? We know that vast majority of them are, you know, not heinous in any way. But once you've done your time, you get out, right? You've served your time. And if you're rehabilitated, then you should equally be able to rejoin society the way that you were part of society when you went in, right? But we have, you know, chastised by labor because most people don't want to hire ex-felons, right? So you can't find a job. You can't vote, so you can't, at least to some extent, affect any change in society. You've lost a ton of rights. You're basically chastised by your community. A lot of people, their marriages collapse, right? For whatever reason, but a lot of, because economically, it doesn't make sense to stay married while one of the potential breadwinners is rotting away in prison. And so you come out and you're alone and you have no support and you don't have anyone you can even rely on. And we hear that the term institutionalized. Well, it's not people that become institutionalized on your own. It's the system that makes you institutionalized, right? That you really don't even have a way to recover from prison time once you're out. And so a lot of people that go in reoffend in some way and get put back in the system, which is what the private prison system wants to happen, because they make money when people stay in prison. And the slave labor that results from that makes money for other people in society, right? This is a definition of the capitalist society, is to take advantage of labor as much as possible, which is why this whole system is self-perpetuating. And it's not set up to help people. It's set up to use people for their free labor.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Nadia, I wanna push back gently on one thing you said. She was talking about how the Supreme Court now, how it's constituted and stacked, will I don't want to paraphrase it, and I lost it somewhere in the chat, but she was saying that Supreme Court will never allow that. So here's my gentle pushback. You don't have to go to the Supreme Court for this. When you have a number of states who have already done it, and reversed courts on banning voting rights, and a number of other things, decriminalizing certain things, you can do it at a state level, and it doesn't require a national picture. So that is my gentle pushback. And then who was it? Derek. I think it was Derek. You are on point this morning. He's talking about recidivism being promoted by parole officers themselves through drug and alcohol tests. And I think that's right. So we've got to do more than just doing the testing and everything else. And here's another fun fact for those of you who are sympathetic or part of the LGBT community. Fun fact. LGBT women, in particular lesbians and bisexual women, are overrepresented in those groups who are within the parole system or in prison systems. So think on that for a little bit. So whatever your niche is, whatever the thing is that is going to maybe get you a little more attuned to what's going on, there's a segment of the population for you, whether you're a member of our Black community and you're talking about Jim Crow, that's for you. Maybe you're a white person who is looking at disenfranchised white people in poor, impoverished communities who are overrepresented in the prison population. There's something for everybody. Whatever it is that's going to get you off your butt and maybe making a phone call or reaching out to a group that's already working on this, please find it. So if you haven't already been convinced, let's get to the effects of climate change on our prison population. So some stories did hit the radar as we went through and the climate crisis has exacerbated. So I included some links to some stories back from 2015, 6 years ago, warning about the effects of climate change on the prison population. And we did nothing. First was in South Carolina, where there was a hurricane, massive hurricane came through and flooding and all of this sort of thing. They did not evacuate a prison right in the center of it. Do you remember that? Everyone else got evacuated, not the prisoners. So if you're still of the mind that prisoners and our prison population, they're not human, oh, by the way, you have prison guards there too, okay? So whatever it is you need to have move you out of this dug-in space, please find some empathy. If not for prisoners, you've got the workers there too that were stuck, and people were injured and some people died in that. And that was 2015, and that was the first time we actually saw mainstream media start to cover this just a little bit, and we probably ignored it. So that was one of the links I included in there. But the other big story, and ironically, this was Fast Company. And I put this link in there, and please go out and read this entire article, because it's talking about what is happening right now. Like Andy and I covered climate change from very specific points of view, particularly in the Northwest region, Oregon, Washington, where they're having this heat wave going into Canada. And we talked about how the human body cannot sustain heat and humidity at certain temperatures, and how all of these people there don't have air conditioning and they were dying. They were going into shelters. Okay, so Fast Company, and they had this quote in here from one of the prison workers. They're like, look, prisons are built out of concrete and steel. What's an oven made out of? And I was like, oh my God, they're right. So here's what's happening in our prison systems. When you have these heat waves coming through, and right now in the United States, it has been every aspect of the country has these massive heat waves, and you don't have basic things like air conditioning in a prison. What happens? You have the prison workers, and these are doctors, nurses, prison guards, administrators, and the prisoners themselves. They're succumbing to massive amounts of instances of heat stroke and death. People are dying. So if that particular statement doesn't move you, then let's go back to the U.S. Constitution when we talk about unusual or the punishment system, right? You can't be cruel and unusual. If you're baking somebody alive in an oven, that is cruel and unusual, and it violates not only state, but federal constitutions. So I am giving you no room here to back away. There's no corner to hide in. Either you support the Constitution of your state and your nation, either you have empathy, either you are aligned to a specific demographic group, male, female, LGBT, whatever. I am trying to take away all of your escape routes so that you can see this for what it is. And in Fast Company, they go through a couple of examples here. So one of the things that's happening in prisons is prisoners they have learned stop up your toilet so it overflows, so that they can lay in the water to cool down, because you cannot lay on your metal bed. It's too hot, you will roast yourself alive. And there was a lawsuit that just got settled where a gentleman died. Um, he was literally roasted to death in his prison cell. And the coroner and the investigators said that, yeah, when they went to go and check on him and check the body was still hot. Not warm, but hot. This gentleman was roasted alive in his prison cell, and that was just a few years ago. And now it's getting worse and worse and worse as the effects of climate change are happening. So it's not just minor inconveniences, like you can't sit at your table and eat a meal because that metal table is too hot. These are really dire situations that are happening, not just with the prison population, but with the guards and staff and everyone else. And here's where I cringe at our humanity. When they introduced a bill, particularly in Texas, to provide air conditioning to these prison populations, we're not talking about luxury facilities. We're just talking about providing some spaces where the air conditioning would allow people to bring down their body temperature. The state representatives and the people of Texas said, fuck that. Said, no, we're not spending a dime on it. So before you say, wait, well, that's Texas. That's Texas. No, this is happening in other states, Virginia and other states. And by the way, it's probably happening in your state too. So these are things that I really need you to move out of your comfort zone and recognize that what is happening here is not just Texas, it's not other places, it's your state too. And when people are making these decisions to either be humane or not, they're doing it on your behalf. It is a reflection, a direct reflection on you. And I don't know how to impress that upon you any more than I can. Like I said, it's my job to bring these stories to you. I can't make you care. I'm trying, but I don't know what else to do. So if you read no other story, please read the link to the story at Fast Company, which ironic, why is Fast Company covering this? Okay, so Nadia says, there is nowhere in the U.S. where prisoner cells are air conditioned. Yeah, that's true. That they have common areas and sometimes centralized air. So yeah, you're right on that front. But and then Derek is replying to optimism, but he says the 13th Amendment that allows slavery if someone has been convicted of a crime, not to mention camping bans, which is a terrible euphemism for people trying to survive. Right. So there's another one, 13th Amendment, right? So all of these, whether you pick just one aspect of it, if we get together and we're all, death by 1,000 cuts on this particular issue, we can actually help make a difference. So Turkey Day, these can be designed in features rather than bugs or side effects. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the other things that I thought was just so typically America, so typical, is I posted a link to not only the UN human rights violations against the United States, and there are a lot of them. We're getting them for what we're doing, outsourcing separation of families on the Mexico side of the border for us. We've had a number of those, and that's still continuing under the Biden administration. But also the way that we treat our prison population. There are numerous UN citations against us. But what did we just do? We slapped Syria, the country of Syria, with sanctions, financial sanctions for their treatment of prisoners, while we're doing the same thing. But in Syria, we're also bombing them, and they're going through the same pandemic we are going through, but worse. So all of their refugee populations are dying. We did a story about the women and children who are disproportionately suffering under U.S. policy, but we are more than happy to play the world's police while we are guilty of the exact same crimes, if not worse. And yeah, Nadia, sanctions are siege warfare. Absolutely. So this, I think, paints a clear picture of American exceptionalism. Everyone accept us, and how our policies play out in the world. So it's a very stark and sober look at who we are, right? And again, I want to emphasize that even if you yourself have not made these decisions, the people that we put into our county boards, our state representatives, and our federal offices to represent us, this is the picture that they are showing of you to the rest of the world and to our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated right now. Are you okay with that? Is this good?
So, Carrie, when it happens in other countries, it's called human rights violations. When it happens in the US, it's called capitalism.
It's brilliant, Andy. Thank you. Thank you. So now my question to everyone in the chat as we're getting to the top of the hour, running out of time, is what are you going to do about it? Like I said, all I can do is present this information to you and hope that you care enough to do something. So in the links in this chat, I have given you a couple different options, some groups that you might reach out to, maybe subscribe to their statistics. Maybe there's something that you can do, but will you? Is it worth your time? I don't know. I hope so. But like I said, the pandemic has shown me a different side of my countrymen that I was not prepared for. So I'm hoping that there are enough of us with still some sense of humanity and community that we will do something. So
Well, eventually, I think it
more.
gets to a place where it's about desperation. The number of waves that are about to hit the shore in the US with the ending of the rent and mortgage moratorium.
Yeah.
The fourth wave that is underway,
It's incredible. So yeah, what was the statistic we did? 20 to 40 million Americans are about to experience homelessness or housing insecurity through evictions, repos, all of that sort of thing. Yeah, and creative experiments. Thank you for joining us. I think this is your first time joining us and for sharing this. Prison is storage for the unemployed. General strike and solar power. Solar power, tiny homes are things I'm working on the fixes. Oh, kudos. So I'm kind of working on a similar experiment. They're not necessarily tiny homes. Tiny homes to me is 300 square feet or less. Working on actual, bigger homes, sustainable and cheap to make. Like literally, when I leave here, I'm going to go put on grubby clothes and I'm going to go out to the field, dig up some dirt, add some Portland cement and some lime and make bricks. And it costs me 2 cents a brick. And these are big bricks that we're going to use to build houses. So yeah, I applaud your effort there. Thank you. So
I think, Carrie,
that is it for me for today.
I think we need to take pictures of Swamp Castle and share them with our audience for on Friday.
Okay, we can do that. And yeah, so we're working on kind of a blog page to outline this project and why we're doing it, and call back to the charity that I'm working with, Veterans Off Grid, as a proof of concept. So yeah, on Friday I will bring the bricks. Maybe I can get Devin back on because he's been a phenomenal help with all of this. But yeah, we are working on a blog page to talk about how to go from a city kid who knows nothing about any of this to sustainable farming on just an acre or so and build a house using your own dirt. I mean, literally, I am using dirt. So yeah, I will bring this out. Let's do it Friday. So that's it. And thank you everybody for weighing in the chat. You guys are phenomenal. I am always so impressed. And I came into this a little apprehensive and maybe depressed, but seeing you guys and how smart you really are, and the resources that you put forward for others to consider, I really appreciate that. I'm feeling better about humanity because of you. So thank you for that. But that's all I got for now. Andy, any last thoughts? Take us out.
Oh, we're just just want to once again thank you, Carrie, for your diligence in reporting and the journalism that you bring to this show. It's unequaled, in my opinion. And I just wanted to say thanks to all our viewers for tuning in today and watching. We really, you have no idea. We really appreciate your interaction in the comments section. And I have to agree, Carrie. We have just the smartest audience, don't we? It's just amazing. So if you are fans of ours or you like what you see, please on YouTube, like and hit the subscribe button and get the notifications. And of course, we are depend on our audience for to fund ourselves. So we have Ko-fi and Patreon accounts that we use for that. And again, we want to thank the great team of ours on Fred Hampton Leftist for including us in their high energy channel that we absolutely love and are so thrilled and privileged to be a part of. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much for watching, everyone. Take care, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, and we will see you here bright and early on Friday morning. Take care.
We bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hair of the dog.